Why, hello everyone. It is I, Arcane, back again. Now, currently 12 a.m. and I've been given permission by Parcacious. Well, a long time ago, I just didn't hold up. Obviously. Now, I'm gonna be reading the Huntsman of Red version 2. Then I'm gonna be going back onto Under the Veil, reading that. Then I'm gonna ask the author of Playing Our Roles if I can read that. In fact, let's do that right now. Just to get it over with, you know? I'm an idiot. I will freely agree. So, let us begin The Huntsman of Red, version 2, by Parcacious, a legendary and talented writer. Guardian, protector, hero, and perhaps something more. That was what he had always meant to her, but to others, he was simply known as the Huntsman of Red, Remnant's final hope. Words could also be considered a type of magic, an art of persuasion, vividness that could breathe life into a world bereft of much sought-after peace. Yet at the same time they gave hope, an idealistic imagination of myths and monsters leading towards an inevitable and eventual good conclusion. Even now, she could still remember them, the words spoken by Yang in her childhood, fairy tales of heroes and magic, about the protectors that had once guarded Remnant in a tumultuous time of violence and death. They whose strength could cleave the mountains and create miracles, spurred on by the shackles of oaths and duties. Legendary figures and mankind's last guardians in the times before dust. As such, for the greatest duration of her life, that was what she and everyone else had always thought of him as, a manifestation of a hero from the fairy tales. He who remained by her side despite her numerous faults. It wasn't until it was too late she realized what he had meant to her, just how much he had done for her and Remnant, creating even Vermilion, its newest kingdom. Honestly speaking, it may have been one of her greatest regrets that she would bury with her to her grave. The fact that she had taken him for granted, the fact that she could never repay his favors, and the fact that she had been too indecisive. Her hands balled into fists, a silver gleam shadowing her weary eyes, as a cloak over her shoulders billowed in a turbulent wind. Rose petals drifting into a storm with every step she took. The area around her was dark, the clouds up above writhing with tendrils of electricity before the rain began to fall. Withered trees, bare of leaves, blackened like the aftermath of a forest. Fire paved a way towards an ominous tower in the distance, surrounded by pools of black filth, whose apex was reaching towards a void in the sky. The lessons he taught her, the memories she cherished, all of it was threatening to explode out from on her in a rage that she had never felt before. Which is why Salem was going to pay. Fate had brought them together. Something he had once said to her on an occasion she had felt the most helpless. Two individuals sharing similar goals and carrying similar ideologies, neither willing to give up on anyone nor wishing to see others suffer. Allies of justice. Her lips thinned as she felt the patter of the rain over her face. He had saved her, the memory still clear in her mind. Then again, that was where it all began. The fairy tale of a little girl and the hero by her side, the Huntsman of Red. Chapter 1. Beginnings. Years prior. Her name was Ruby Rose, the young daughter of the ex-huntsman Tai Yang Zhao Long, a graduate from Beacon Academy, school of huntsmen and huntresses, tasked with defending the world, remnant against the grim. She didn't know much about who or what the grim were due to the relative scope of her limited exposure to the world of remnant, but she had always heard that they were the monsters that her mother and father had once fought against. All kinds of thoughts occupied her mind as she thought of them. Were they tall? Did they have claws? Did she have to fear one hiding beneath her bed or in her closet? She shivered at that concept, as it seemed all too likely for her 5-year-old mind to believe. More so when the outer boundaries of her worldly experiences were defined solely by the dreadful reaches of the menacing plastic playfits her father had set up by the doors, barring her in. However, this time was different. She was going to see the world outside of her home in the island of Patch. Fumbling with the hood of her oversized red cloak she had over her head, she eventually loosened the straps around her neck such that a rounded and pudgy-cheeked face popped out, flushed red from the effort. Tufts of red-colored hair, tousled from her earlier actions, fell over her eyes, but she could hardly care less, before she brushed them off and looked excitedly around her. The sound of rolling wheels echoed into her ears as she adjusted her position on the small wagon she was sitting on, hands finding purchase at the edges before lifting herself up to get a better view of her surroundings. It was all forest, the thick foliage impairing her view, yet the experience itself was new enough that she still felt that she was on an adventure. The only thing that was missing, in her opinion, was her mother and father's presence. Then everything would have been perfect. Recently, though, she was slightly troubled as to why her mother hadn't come back yet. But her father had explained to her before that it was probably a minor setback, and that she would return shortly. Young as she was, however, she had failed to notice the anxiety present in her father's eyes, happily returning to her playpen to distract herself with her toys. Still, no matter how she tried to put the matter aside, by the third day of her mother's absence it was all that she could think about. As such, her elder sister's sudden decision to take her outside on an adventure was a welcome method of distracting her. Realizing that she had seen enough of the forest on one side of the wagon, she immediately shifted her position to stare at the other side. A clearing in the forest revealing a field of red roses. She was captivated, and for a moment she didn't realize she had been moving too much in her days, but the one pulling the wagon did. "Ruby, can you keep still?" The voice that called out to her was childish, with a high pitch similar to her own. It was her elder sister, Yang Xiaolong. Unlike herself, Yang had long, flowing golden-colored hair that she generally kept unbrushed and falling down her back. Yang didn't prefer wearing her cloak and was more comfortable wearing a simple blouse and brown jacket. Unlike her wide silver eyes, which glanced away in guilt, Yang's lilac eyes were somewhat narrowed as she lightly admonished. "Sorry," she said, head drooping as she relaxed herself back in the wagon. "Mm-hmm." Yang only grunted, a troubled expression over her face. Ruby peeked up at the Yang subtly when she thought that Yang wasn't looking, and sooner pursed her lips. Young as she was, she couldn't understand what was happening at her home lately. Yang always seemed like she was close to crying, and her father was speaking to her less and less as the days went by. She didn't like it, not a single bit. If only her mother would come home sooner. She'd definitely find a way to cheer them up. Sad as Yang looked, Ruby felt that it was better to keep quiet and instead just enjoy her first outing from her home. Small bruises ran up and down Yang's arms, but most of them had been caused due to her own negligence and inexperience when pulling the wagon through the forest. In the end, the thing that was affecting her the most was still her exhaustion. Yang was panting, her breath coming out in clouds of white vapor due to the temperature of the fall season. Ruby had already felt bad that she was adding on to Yang's exhaustion by continuing to sit in the wagon, but Yang insisted that she didn't get off. It was the duty of an elder sister or something like that.
What a load of baloney. What a load of baloney. Yeah, I know, right?
Eventually, Ruby got bored of staring off into the scenery as a child would and began to simply stare absently into space. Of course, Yang noticed this and eventually began recounting the fairy tales she had read and heard from both her mother and father to pass the time. Yang's voice, the soft crunch of the dirt beneath, and the babbling of a 5-year-old were the only sounds to echo in the silent forest of Patch. Although Yang was the eldest sister, she was only 2 years older than Ruby. The extent of her stamina could only take her so far, making it fortunate that the two eventually discovered an abandoned building. Worn and brittle-looking, the planks of wood and timber that made the foundations of the building reeked with the pungent smell of moss and rot, yet the building itself seemed to be in good enough condition. Patterns of some sort were etched into the ground, some like ancient runes, while others resembled magic circles that Ruby only briefly remembered seeing in a show Yang had once been watching.
It has to be here.
Yang muttered to herself, but Ruby couldn't understand the context and just stared curiously. Wheeling the wagon beside the house, Yang pulled Ruby out and held her by the hand as the two entered.
Yang! Yang!
She called out softly.
What are we doing here? It's okay, Ruby. Just trust me. Yang!
Yang brushed aside the question, eyes falling onto a table found past the entrance of the building. On the table were messily laid out papers and strange-looking books. However, that wasn't what Yang was interested in, as her eyes focused instead on the food left behind. It wasn't rotten, and that was all Yang needed to know, that someone had visited this place recently. And that's 13 minutes. Well, this is Arcane. Signing off. Huntsman of Red, Version 2, Chapter 1, Part 1. Have a lovely day.